And I'm Sabrina. I'm the co founder of Calm Collective Asia, and we're a social enterprise that is normalizing mental health conversations across Asia. And today we're going to be talking about how leaders should be supporting mental health at work. And today we have Lassen Ong, who is the co founder of Visual Studio Singapore. We have Lisa from Love Bonito. She's the Chief People Officer. And we have Moses Mohan, who is the Global Head of Leadership Solutions at Potential Project. So, some context before we start. Yeah, with blurred lines between work and life during the pandemic, increasing burnout, and the Great Resignation, the past 2 years have cast a spotlight on the role of companies and leaders in supporting the mental health of their employees. I'm not sure if you feel that way, but yeah, I certainly do. And now more than ever, we're seeing an uptrend of companies, leaders, and employees engaging in mental health conversations like ours with much less stigma. However, leaders are still criticized for not walking the talk. And the efforts around the stigmatization is not exactly fully translated into enough action across the ranks. So people like us are still feeling burnt out, disengaged, and poorly supported at work. And this is especially true in Singapore, the world's most fatigued country, where 1 in 2 workers feels exhausted and 58% of us feel overworked, according to Microsoft's Work Trend Index published in May. So it's been a really hard challenge for leaders everywhere, whether you're running a small business or a director at an MNC or managing a team that is, really hustling and growing. Leaders everywhere are tasked with ensuring the continuity of their business, and also tasked now with the responsibility of their team's well-being. So today's panel, we'll be discussing a few things. So, firstly, the role of the leader in safeguarding the mental well being of the teams, and we'll learn some actionable strategies and initiatives from our speakers. And we're also going to be talking about what leaders can do to take care of their own mental health so that they can take care of their teams better. So, without further ado, I'm going to invite our speakers today to introduce themselves. So, let's start with Lassen. I'm going to go by alphabetical order. Lassen,
Sure.
please.
Sure. Hi, Sabrina. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I certainly belong to one of the two who's a little bit tired after the pandemic. So my name is Larson. I'm a marketer by trade. I started my creative agency when I was 24 years old. That's almost 18 years ago. So back then, entrepreneur wasn't a trending hashtag like it is today. We just knew that we had something good to offer, so we started our firm. In the last 18 years, we had 10 other failed ventures. And right now I'm on my 11th. I'm busy with Brownback Singapore, which is a corporate training company. So that's what keeps me busy currently. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks, Larson. Okay, Lisa, your turn.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Sabrina. And thanks, Larson, as well. I guess my background is a little bit varied. I've been in Singapore for 5.5 years now, having come from Australia and worked across a variety of different companies, both the big mega global pharmaceutical companies and also the much smaller startup world. So really varied background in how we can work with people in the workplace to really achieve a positive outcome. And this year I've been very fortunate to join Love Bonito here in Singapore as their Chief People Officer. And that is a fantastic growth curve for me as well, because the business is growing. And so really being able to get into a business and work cross-border and really in a lot of ways have that slightly blank slate as it expands to really support the people in the business. And that's our primary focus at the moment. So mental health is really key for us.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And Moses, over to you.
Thanks, Lawson and Lisa. My name is Moses. I'm very happy to be spending time. I'm always surprised that people want to hang out and spend time together, so it's very humbling every single time. I'm originally from Singapore. I'm currently living in Seoul, South Korea with my wife. I head up the leadership practice at Potential Project globally, and essentially we blend research with science and also the wisdom traditions to try to create a more human world of work. So working primarily with large organizations like IKEA, Unilever, and McKinsey globally in particular. In previous lifetimes, I used to be a consultant at McKinsey and was a monk once upon a time, but that's probably a story for another time. But yeah, I think it's probably an understatement to say that it's been challenging for all of us in the last 2 to 3 years. So I think mental health in particular, and in the workplace where we spend the bulk of the time, is a very, very important topic near and dear to me. And like Larson, I'm feeling a bit tired as well.
Oh man, thank you so much for for sharing that and joining us today. I think all of us have as leaders and people in our position, it's been really hard, right? And I think another topic that came up was around compassion fatigue. But okay, that's for a different talk. So I just wanted to get started with a chat. And the question that I want to start with is, how have the expectations of leaders changed when it comes to supporting the mental well-being of their teams? And I wanted to direct this question first to Lisa. Why don't you start first?
Sure. It's an interesting question because I think mental health has been on the radar of leaders for many years now. And it's been there, but it's almost been a tick in the box solution, which is really sad. And it's really important, I think, as a leadership team for all of us to understand that's quite often the way mental health has been treated in the workplace, which unfortunately hasn't helped people. It might have helped the occasional person, but the overall have missed out, because if it's just a tick in the box, it's not supported. And I think what COVID really did was it pushed it to the forefront. It's no longer a tick in the box. You just can't have a nice program that makes your company sound good. You actually have to have something that works for your people. And you know what? That's a lot more effort than just finding an external provider and paying them a large sum of money to provide a service. It really makes leaders reassess who they are, but also get to know their people. And that's what we need to do. I mean, we know right now the people in our workforce are value-based, and they're coming in the door. They're going to be more value-based. Now, a big part of that is mental health. If we can't meet that as a leadership team, we're failing our people. And that means we have to change the way we manage. We have to change the way we question, the types of things we talk about, the types of things we open up at work, and the support structures we give our people to feel safe and confident so they can actually talk about mental health. We as a leadership team now have to take the stigma away, not just provide a service. And that's a much bigger, more difficult piece of work than just providing a service. So I think it's a great change, and it's forcing us in a really good direction.
Definitely. I mean, we're seeing this, I guess, change in expectations across the board. And it resonates so much with me, Lisa, when you said that people are a lot more values-based these days, right? Larson, is that what you're seeing as well in your role and in your work?
I'm always in the SME space, so there are a lot of myths about working for SMEs, long hours, unreasonable bosses. Hopefully, I'm not included. But there are a lot of things that SMEs can do as well. I think right now we are about 90% of the workforce, of the employer, of the overall workforce. And I think one big thing that changed during COVID-19 is, like what Lisa said, mental health is no longer just a perk that you put your brand out there. Oh, I'm a top employer to work for. Leaders are expected to put things that actually work, no longer just a lip service. And as an employer in the SME space, I think a lot of times we ought to set a good example. How many SME bosses actually dare to say, hey, I've got to leave at 4 o'clock because I need to bring my dog to the vet? Not too many. So I think moving forward, leading by example, taking care of our own mental health first is an important thing.
And we'll definitely talk about that, Larson. I mean, I think even for me, leading my team, it's been really hard to, at some times, right? Because you want to make sure that things are going the way that you want it to. It's hard to practice what you preach, right? Even though you're like, okay, guys, you have to take a break and take care of yourselves. It's hard for leaders to take care of themselves too. And I guess I'd love to hear from Moses, right? Because you've been working also with a different type of different set of companies and organizations. So are you seeing this as well, that the expectations have changed now, whether it's across the different companies or even different generations or geographies?
Absolutely. I think I echo what's been shared, that I think one of the great silver linings of COVID has been questioning, is the way that we're working, and is the way that we're leading working as well. And the world of work is always changing, but I think that change has really accelerated in the last couple of years, and it's impacted everybody. But I think it's getting harder and harder to be a leader, actually, because you have to drive results. That's still expected. And at the same time, it's an expectation, a good one, for you to be human. It's an expectation for you to care for your employees, to help them work through anxiety, uncertainty, and even grief. And while doing that, reskilling for a hybrid world of work, return to office, the list goes on. So I think definitely there's been a shift overall, and people expect more out of work, which I think is extremely healthy. I think if I were to sort of try to generalize it, there were more progressive companies, more human-centered companies that were already doing that. And there were the more traditional performance-oriented ones. I think COVID was a tipping point that pushed them across the line to see that mental well-being, however you frame it, resilience, etc., it's not a nice to have. It's a fundamental human dignity to have in the workplace, but it's not easy. I think leaders feel like I have to be a superhero or a martyr these days. And I think Larson said as well, it starts with them. So I think it all starts with the self as well.
Lisa, what are your thoughts around, I think in the previous chat that we had right before this, you're talking about psychological safety. And I think this always starts with the leader and starts from the top. What are your thoughts around how psychological safety plays in, supporting the mental well-being of employees or of teams?
Look, I think it makes a massive difference. If someone doesn't feel like they can raise their voice and be heard and be accepted, then they're not going to raise their voice. So we've already put stigma in the workplace. We've already stopped people from being human by cutting them off there. And, I look back to workplaces I worked in 15, 20 years ago. There was no way on earth you would think about raising your voice to say, I'm feeling depressed. It just would not happen, because you were very much made to feel like you then risked your job. And the same issue 20 years ago with pregnancy. If you said you're thinking of having kids, you really had to plan how to bring this up, because you were made to believe it would impact your career and whether you get that next promotion, whether you'd still be with the business. So it's really scary that it's only been in very recent history. This is all sat behind people. And so still in today's workplace, people feel this. They know these things have happened. They know they're a reality, sadly. And there's still companies out there that do work that way. And I'm very sad that they do. Because, doing that, we're squashing our people. We're never going to allow people to grow. They're never going to be successful truly in their roles. Yes, you might generate some profits. Yes, your business might work forward, but never at the level it could be. Well under. And that's where, as a leader, we have to make sure that our people feel they can raise their voices. That, whether it's, the dog to the vet, as we mentioned earlier, whether it's a sick child, a sick grandparent, maybe it's just a really bad financial outcome from a family issue. Whatever it happens to be, people need to feel that that's not a stigma, that that's part of who they are as an individual, and they're allowed to voice that opinion and say, hey, it's affected me. I'm going to be a bit funny for a few days. I feel bad about this. It's bothering me. It's on my mind. And we need to let people do that, because they're human. If we keep making them bottle it up, they're going to break at some point, or they're going to break something else. And that's going to have a much worse outcome. And that's why I say to people, you need that level of psychological safety first, so people feel they can speak, no matter what it happens to be, how weird, random, or terrible, and they can be supported, listened to, and heard.
And I think, Moses, you've done some work around compassionate leadership. So how does that, tie into the idea of psychological safety, and what can leaders practically do to, create this environment that supports their well-being?
I have to warn you, I get very excited about this.
Uh-oh.
I just co-authored a book that called Compassionate Leadership that was published with HBR in February. So please stop me if it's too much. But from our research, we found that there are two important qualities that a leader has to cultivate in order to actually create an environment of psychological safety. And broadly speaking, it's wisdom and compassion, or being hard and being human in simpler terms. So, because the reality is, as I said earlier, you have to still deliver and to be human. But without getting into the details, which we could get into later, I think it starts with role modeling vulnerability, role modeling humanity, starting with yourself. If you're having a difficult day, if something tough is going through in your personal life, just being able to voice that openly in a team space, then creates a space for others to do that as well. And then that's sort of the human piece. And at the same time, also acknowledging that, there are a couple of things that I still need to take care of. Is there anyone who might support me? So again, holding those two levers, I think, together is very, very critical, I think, ultimately, to create psychological safety, especially in the workplace.
So it's about doing hard things in a human way,
Absolutely.
which is even
Absolutely.
harder, right?
You know, it's interesting because I think historically there's been a bit of a line between both. Either you're a good manager or you're a good human being. But I think it's actually a false dichotomy. Both and actually the research is showing that when you do both well together, your people are happier, less burnt out, and you're happier and more satisfied overall as well. So again, this is the data, but I would say that ultimately if you intentionally cultivate both, it's good for you, it's good for the team, and it's good for the business overall as well. So actually net, I would say it's not easier, but it's better for everybody involved.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Moses. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Last time I saw you smiling and maybe laughing. You're on mute, so I'm not sure. How did any of that resonate with you?
Psychology safety, right? It sounds like a big word, but end of the day, you want to feel safe wherever you are, whether to speak up, whether to ask for time off. And in an SME setting where we really don't have that kind of budget like a lot of the big boys, we focus on people and culture. And I think these two are interrelated. People first, and then your work culture is a byproduct that comes around with, over time. And then when all these are in place, you can start to talk about systems and infrastructure. I feel psychological safety comes somewhere in between culture and infrastructure. If your work culture itself, people are willing to coach and people are willing to mentor the juniors to succeed, and not so much of I want to step on your shoulders to achieve the best salesperson kind of honors, then the culture is the right place. If the culture is right, then you can put in efforts to make sure people feel safe to talk about their own problems. Nobody likes to talk about vulnerability. Nobody's want to say that I'm feeling weak. I don't think I can handle this stress for this week. It's difficult. So they have to feel safe in the culture first. Then all the other perks can then make sense.
And last, and I think just to add on to the whole feeling of safety and being able to be vulnerable and ask for help, I think in the culture that or society that we operate in, it's even harder, right? Because we're not taught from a young age to ask for help. We're taught to be perfect. So we're supposed to be perfect and bring our best selves to work. And we really do need to get the permission from the top to be able to I guess to be able to carry ourselves as such, right?
You're right.
Yeah, and it was really interesting that you brought up the idea of how psychological safety kind of sits between culture and infrastructure. And as an SME, to build that infrastructure, whether it's through maybe like introducing an employee assistance program or mental health benefits, it may not necessarily be the best option, right? Because it's not cheap to make that happen. There is a cost to everything, right? So I guess I'm really curious to know, Lisa, how you're looking at this challenge, right? So as a leader of, at La Bonito, how are you tackling the question of how the company should be supporting the team's mental well-being?
Yeah, look, we're doing it in two ways, and you're right. Those big programs, they are expensive. And we don't always know that people are going to use them either. And I think that the classic example is, and I've seen it so often in other big corporate businesses, is they have their big program that's ticked their box. They've popped it into the business, and they've all patted themselves on the back. We've done a good job at looking after our people. But it's a bit like if I gave you a book on astrophysics and said, "Hey, you can make a spaceship, and the stars are up there, aren't they fantastic? They're gorgeous. You can be a star. Here you go."
Yeah,
Go build it.
so true.
It's not going to happen at that point in time, because there's all these underlying things for people to actually feel confident in accessing that program. And that's what we're just talking around, the psychological safety. If you think your boss is going to then question you because you've made a call to an EAP helpline, are you going to do it? No, you're going to be scared to do it. If your team speaks badly and is a toxic team and jokes about people who have issues, you're going to be the last person who's going to put your hand up and say, "Hey, I have an issue." So there's a lot of underlying structure there. I think that as a business, whether we're a tiny SME or a big corporate, we need to actually look at really seriously. And a lot of this comes back to us as leaders. If we can't be authentic leaders who are honest with ourselves and actually role model and lead by example and say, "Hey, I do have to take the afternoon off. This has happened. I can manage everything around it. I'm human. We've just gone through 2 years of work from home. We should be able to do this. There should be a much higher level of trust now. If you can't do it yourself as a leader, people underneath you aren't going to, because they're going to feel scared. One of the simplest things we've done at Love Benito, and it's so easy to do, is that in our office space, we have a small room, right? Now, we could have made it another office, we could have made it whatever, but we've ended up making it a nursing room. And it's actually split between nursing and basically anyone who feels like they need a timeout. Because when we're in the workplace, sometimes we get a hard phone call from a relative, sometimes we've got to call the bank. Sometimes we've got to do something. We want a bit of privacy and maybe 20 minutes to recover afterwards. And so that room is really encouraged to be used that way. So obviously there are ladies who need it for nursing. That's, a different perspective, but still it's that privacy and that safety, and there's a little fridge in there. That's very low cost, but it gives a high level of mental health, and it shows that we as a business and as leaders are saying to our people, hey, we respect this. We know you need it. We support it. Here it is. There's actually a room that you can go to. No questions asked. And, I think that the big thing there is, I've had my staff use that room. They said, look, I was just having a hard day. I went and had an hour lay down and nap. So my first question is, that's fantastic. How do you feel now? Are you okay? Do you need to go back? Do you need to work from home? What do you need to do? But then as a leader, at the end of that conversation, we need to turn around and say, thank you. Thank you for using the room, and thank you for telling me. Because that shows we're supporting that. We see it as normal. We see it as what they should be doing as a person in the workplace to support themselves and stay mentally healthy. So it's the little things that we can do as leaders that can make all the big differences.
Definitely. And Moses, I'm curious to know whether you've seen any examples of how leaders can proactively, support their teams.
Yeah, I agree that fundamentally it is actually a culture and systems piece. It's about creating a more human world of work. The risk of EAP programs is it's like the ping pong table in the old startup companies. It's cool, you have it, people like it, and it checks the box. But so it starts with culture, and for example, a simple one is starting all your meetings with 5 minutes of asking a simple question: how are you really? And you role model that. You share how you're feeling, and you actually give people the space to and you listen in a non-judgmental way. That is a very micro practice that adds up over time, for example. Or many of us perhaps are in back-to-back Zoom meetings, just spending a minute at the start just to pause for a minute, whether you want to call it mindfulness or just space, just giving people a bit of spaciousness. These small things add up. But I think also on a very practical level, bringing clarity in your leadership, expectations, priorities, helping people to understand what's important, what's not important. So it's all fine and well to have programs or no programs, but people still have the reality of the workplace demands and culture. So you as a leader have the influence to shape that. So I think a big part of it also is not just focusing only on the well-being piece, but also how do you manage performance in a way that's healthy for people as well. So we can't ignore that, I think.
That's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I was just having a conversation with the CEO of this recruitment firm, right? Recruiting firm. And he was like, oh, I really want to do something about mental well-being, but what if my team is going to think that, I've gone soft, And I think, Moses, you brought up how people can balance it out through both creating that supportive environment by asking simple questions, having simple routines or rituals, but still have that clarity of roles to make sure that, things get done as they should, right?
Maybe,
go ahead.
Can I add one thing here, Seth?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think mental health sometimes has a framing challenge, in my opinion, and the more performance-oriented individuals who are groomed in a particularly alpha way might resist it. But if you frame it as, for example, driving human performance, for example. So I think there's a piece around for every organization around thinking about what's the right framing that will be accepted in the culture. Ultimately, a rose is a rose by any other name, so it doesn't really matter. But sometimes mental health has that connotation in truth. So how do we frame it in a way that allows leaders and people to actually embrace it?
Yes, that's such a good piece. And I would love to hear from Larson and Lisa as well, how you're framing it at your own, within your own teams, right? Because what I've heard is that In one company, the idea of self-compassion works, but the other company is like, let's talk about stress and burnout. And then another one is like, let's talk about high performance, right? So I'm like, wow, I think we have to really understand how the culture of the company and who you're working with in order to even talk about mental health. So Larson, over to you. What's that like for your company and the companies you work with?
As a SME consultant, I speak to many bosses of local startups and SMEs, and they always throw me one difficult question. Yeah, I know mental health is important. How do I balance mental health care and performance of the firm? End of the day, we are talking about revenues and bottom lines. So I always give them this example. Imagine you decided to take up jogging to stay healthy. Now you have two options. You can either buy an expensive treadmill but not use it, or you can start by jogging on the streets. It's free. So not all mental health perks have to be expensive. So here, let me share with you three simple things that as a leader, you can make it a little bit better for everybody who works in a team. I think Moses shared job clarity. It's important that in an SME, when everybody is it's multitasking, everyone is a generalist, making sure everyone is clear in their role and their responsibility is important. We always assume that, well, she knows, she's a HR executive, she knows what she's supposed to do, but that's not always the case. That's not always the case. So providing job clarity, if once in a few months, you just go through the JD once again, it helps. Second, curating and providing online resources in a safe environment, making sure your employees can access them anonymously is also important. We always think that, well, everybody knows Google gives everything. Yeah, but that's again not true. So if as employer, you're able to curate trustworthy, well-researched materials and you share within your team, that will help them to realize, oh, I've seen some red flags. Oh, this is what I may be experiencing. Maybe I should seek help. That can help push your employees towards certain actions. Number three, mentorship. If you can create a trustworthy environment where people can counsel each other and ask for help within the firm, we're not even talking about paid consultancy outside, counseling, psychotherapy, no. Within the firm, somebody who you can trust. It reduces anxiety and stress at work. Just the fact that you can ask somebody for help. It is not a sign of weakness. That helps a lot within the firm. So these three suggestions are free. They are not your expensive treadmill. You can go and try them out straight away, no budgets.
Yeah. That's amazing. So anyone out there, whatever budget you have, or if you have no budget at all, there's still something that you can do to support your team's mental health and well-being. Thanks, Larson. Lisa, how about you? What's your take on this?
So in terms of the programs, or more in terms of how we frame it as a place?
Maybe both, framing and then the programs.
Yeah, I think for us, the way we're looking at it is we're putting it under that broader wellness banner, because it is all about employee wellness and giving them value, allowing them to feel valued in the workplace. And I also, at the end of the day, no matter how good we are as people experts in a business, we can't fight stigma, and the terms mental health still carry so much stigma with them. And as much as that frustrates me personally to no end, I can't get out there and change that overnight. So I think if we start to make it broader, we take the stigma away, or we ignore the stigma altogether and actually start talking about wellness and what that means for individuals. And that can be different for everyone. Some people have families, some don't. Some are at the beginning of the career, some are towards the end. What they need and what they value is very different. So let's look at it from that broader wellness perspective, and let's hold ourselves accountable as leaders to make sure we're just meeting those core values. We're checking in with people, we're asking how they are. We're having those discussions, we're having that stop. One of the things that we do is stop every now and then, and rather than having a business-focused one-on-one, we have a person-focused one-on-one. How are you really doing? How do you actually feel at work? What is driving you nuts? What's bothering you? What keeps you awake at night? What do you enjoy? What would you like more of? Have those conversations. Don't talk about the next project deadline. Don't go near it. Just drop it for a change. Because that way, as a manager or a leader in your business, your people actually can see that you're human. And also I think it gives you invaluable information as a leader, so you can relate to your people. Because if you're a good leader in today's value-based workforce, you have to be authentic. You should be sharing the things that have happened to you as well. And I know that's super hard for some leaders, because they're really worried about being perceived as being weak, or not knowledgeable enough. But you've got to come to terms with the fact that in today's world, we can't know everything. But you know what? We can provide as much as possible, and we can listen, and we can help people exceed in their abilities to provide those extra answers. And all of those things rolling together from a leadership point of view really help employee wellness. You know, because they know they're valued, they know that we're listening, we're supporting them, we're not judging them, there's no stigma there. And it's what works for that employee on that day. I think that's the super important part. And both Larson and Moses have mentioned a lot of the programs don't cost anything. They really don't. It's about being human at work. And as a leader, being comfortable with being human, being your authentic self, so that other people can listen and go, hey, I get that. I understand how they felt that way. Actually, I went through that once and I can relate to that and I know how they got through it and I can talk to them about it. That can make all the difference to someone.
No, that's yeah. I'm just so touched by how human we're all being here, and you know, one thing I've noticed is that oftentimes it takes someone at the top who recognizes this, that you know it's important to be human, to be authentic, to in order to support the people around them and to create that culture where it's psychologically safe. And what I think what's coming up for me right now is I'm wondering how leaders, say like, you know, like yourself, Lisa, Larson, Moses, how can leaders share this culture of, you know, authenticity, of psychological safety with the people and like beneath them, right? So not beneath them, that's not right. But the people reporting to them. So like managers, how do you translate this culture to the rest of the team? Right? It starts with yourself, but is there anything that one can do to get this to the broader organization? Maybe Moses, that's a question for you.
I think you asked on two levels. One is how do you create a culture within your team, and then how do you spread it within the organization? So I think, I mean, to be honest, this is just about being human. I know we may be oversimplifying it, but I think part of it is having a conversation with your team around what sort of culture we want to have together. You know, and what are those words or phrases that really is the culture that we want to create. But if you stop there, it becomes a nice document that you put on the wall and you look at from time to time. I think you have to keep yourself honest, periodically reviewing this, you know, based on our list of values as a team, how are we doing? And what's working, not working, or what's missing as well. So just being very intentional about culture design within a team context. In the context of the entire organization, that's not as easy. I think one needs to be able to build the case for change. Of course, first finding like-minded leaders who are thinking the same as well. And there's so much data out there these days, and I hate to be a little bit hard here, but the business case for mental health, so to speak, and there's data showing that it actually costs the business more money over time. We used to work with Marriott, and they had a very simple mantra: if we take care of our people will take care of our customers, and the business will take care of itself. It's so simple, but I think building a business case, especially if you are not at the C-level, and then sharing it with the C-level to see how they respond to that. So you need to create a little bit of a burning platform authentically, I think, and then seeing how you can go from there. But in my work with more traditional organizations like banks, there was a particular UK bank who, and I quote, "The soft has become the hard." They are acknowledging that, and they're seeing that for them to have a license to operate moving forward, they need to be more, as Lisa said, values-based, purpose-oriented. People simply aren't going to stay. People aren't going to stay. So I think the business case is very important if you're looking at the system.
No, that's a really good point. I'd love to hear from you, Lisa. What would you say to encourage other leaders to support mental health at work? What would your elevator pitch look like?
Oh, okay. Good question. I would probably mostly steal from Moses, to be honest, because if people really don't believe it's important now, then the low-hanging fruit for us as a leader is to say, let's look at the costs. Because, you know, if you're not looking at the costs, you don't understand the impact of not focusing on this and what it's actually done to your business. And, you know, typically I would go down the line of, if we're not looking after our employees, if we're not looking after their wellness, they're going to leave us within 18 months. And when you start doing your P&Ls and you look at the cost of turnover, you look at attrition, and you look at retraining, it's a massive amount of money. And actually it far outweighs anything we can do as leaders or even programs we can purchase to keep our people at a level of happiness and engagement that keeps them successful in the workforce. So I would really focus on that point of view. And over the years, I've had that discussion with many CFOs, because quite often it's the CFO who comes up, and it's hard for us in the people space to prove metrics. Yes, we can go to the global studies. Yes, we can find some great numbers. It's getting better now, I must say, than what it was a few years ago. But it's that real argument. Do your numbers. Look at your attrition, your trading cost, your lack of engagement cost, because you can run that, and your average replacement of staff costs or your recruitment hire costs. And they're absolutely massive. So if anyone doubts that, even quite often a 10 or 15% shift in those numbers can be huge for a business. So we need to look at how we can do it. And then I take that needs analysis back to the leadership team and really say to them, who do we want to be as leaders? Because if we don't want this, then there's a whole bigger issue here. If we don't want to look after our people and create an environment where they can thrive and, value their job and give value back to the business at the same time, and that's a big question for the leadership team. There's an issue there that's above a simple conversation or looking at a change in direction. But, most teams would turn around and say, yeah, no, this is what we do. How do we achieve it? So that's when it comes to working together with the leadership team to really get their leadership charter up and running, to understand what they're going to guarantee their people they're going to give them. And once you can get to that point, then you can start funneling it through the organisation. And you can get your supporting people in place, all your different levels of leadership. You get your culture champions in place who run through programs, who really drive these initiatives and make people feel valued and included. And that's when it starts to take on a life of its own. But it's a big piece of work. But once again, most of it can be done internally. It's just, you've got to have the people who are committed to it and the leaders who agree that it's going to be something that they're going to focus on and support in their day-to-day.
It's ultimately really about the commitment then. Yeah. And Larson, what would your pitch be for, say, maybe smaller SMEs where the leaders themselves can say, yes, I'm going to do this?
I started my own company many years ago. It gave me a comfortable life. I wasn't successful, but I would say I was comfortable financially. I've checked all the 5 C's by the time I was 30, but all those came at the expense of my own mental health. In 2016, I struggled with depression for 2 years before I turned to psychotherapy and counseling, and it really turned me around. In Singapore, in the Asian context, alpha male business owner, and if you are the only son in the family, you have the perfect persona that nobody can expect you asking for help, and that has to change. And if leaders are not willing to take this change, to take the first step and say, I'm vulnerable, I need help, I can feel down sometimes, then they're in for a difficult time because their employees are expecting that. So the change has to start from them.
Yeah. Thank you, Larson. Thanks so much for that. And I'm happy that you're here sharing the message and sharing your story right now. I have a last question before we move over to the Q&A. And this question is maybe something a bit more personal. And so the question is, so as leaders yourselves in your respective fields and organizations, what do you do for yourself to manage your own mental health? I'll start with Moses.
I think slowing down to speed up is very important. And maybe I'm overframing it here, but just pressing the pause button. And for me, that is space every day to do a bit of meditation, go for a walk with my wife, grounding myself. And it gets tough frequently, actually, but pausing. And I think the other thing also is that, I can't remember where this quote is from, but sometimes there's this idea that self-compassion or mental well-being is chocolate cakes and bubble baths. I mean, that's true sometimes. I like cake. I really like cake. But it's also just being very honest. Do I need to be in this meeting? Can I let go of it? So being a little bit ruthless also around, and I use the word ruthless here not lightly, but looking at what are you focused on? Are these really the top priorities that is going to shift the needle for you in the business? And what can you let go of, delegate, or defer until later? So I think it's the pausing, but also being very real with yourself. And I think the combination of both for me keeps me sane. And from time to time, taking extended pauses. I think that's just necessary, recharging.
Thank you, Moses. Lisa, what's yours?
Yeah, I think for me, it's just keeping those activity levels up. I mean, everyone's different with this, but you know, I do like to exercise and I do like to try and keep fit. I like to get out in the sun where possible. So it's those little short breaks. So yeah, making sure that there is exercise in some part of the day, even if it's just a longer walk rather than doing anything, you know, overly strenuous, just to clear the mind and do those kind of things. I think during the day at work, I mean, for myself, if I'm in the office all day and I'm going between meetings and everything else, obviously we all know what that's like. You get a bit, you know, stuck, you're running from thing to thing to thing. One of the things that I always make sure I have, and my staff will probably laugh at this if they're listening, is I've always got a cup of tea. I know that sounds weird, but I love herbal teas. I love Chinese tea. I drink all the random ones from around the region, and I have a drawer full. And so literally between each meeting, I top my tea up with a new tea bag. And for me, that's something that's really, I enjoy doing, and it's part of my workplace as well now, but it gives me something back. It's not just rush, rush, rush. So yeah, for me, that's something that I find really enjoyable during the day.
Very nice. Do you have any tea brands or tea types that you would recommend for us?
Oh, I'm very, very agnostic, but obviously being here, the Clipper tea and the TWG is always in the drawer because they're great teas. But I love to do so fun things again is like literally go onto random Chinese websites where I can only read a very small amount of what's written on there and buy some of the very fresh teas that have been picked from the region. And you get some amazing surprises. So for me, it's a bit of an adventurous thing as well.
Lovely. All right. Thanks, Lisa. We got to talk about tea. All right. Larson, over to you. How do you take care of your mental health?
Right. I'm an old-fashioned guy. I love my routines, and in my routines, I slot in me time throughout the day. So my day usually starts at 5 a.m., even on weekends. So usually I'll be in office by 7. I've cleared I'll clear most of the important things before the people start coming in at 10. So that helps. I exercise regularly, like Lisa. I box quite a bit, so I go for my boxing almost every day. It helps if you have a tough day. Imagine that particular client or that particular vendor and put his face on the bag and whack it all out. That helps. And then
I hope they're not listening right now.
well, yeah, so that helps a little bit. And then I spend a lot of time with my dog at night. So we will go for regular walks. I walk her twice a day actually, but at night I try to make it at least about an hour. So it's good for her and it gives me time to think about my day or to imagine what's going to happen the next day. And it's quite therapeutic. So I love doing this.
Very nice. Okay. I see Caleb says Moses joined UFC. I think that's Larson. Larson joined UFC. All right. So I have a couple of questions here. Actually, we have quite a lot of questions, but we'll just answer 2 or 3. So Caleb asks, so not all of us are leaders. So how do we question the leaders to be responsible in ensuring wellness in the team or the workplace? What can employees do to convince their, the managers and leaders to take care of well-being? Who would like to take this one? Lisa, maybe, or Moses?
I think that's a super hard position to put yourself in as an employee. So look, well done on asking the question because you're obviously thinking quite seriously about this and you're going to put yourself out there, which I know can be a bit confronting as well. But I think at that point of view, if you're in a workplace and you as an employee are saying to find that, wellness is suffering, just be honest, speak up. I have that obviously closed door conversation. Don't bring it up in the middle of a meeting. Pick your space, prepare for it, and really understand what you want to ask. Are you seeing something or is it personal to you? And, either way, what is the solution? Don't go in just with the problem. Give them some idea of what you think you need at this level to help you with that issue, because that shows that you're actively engaged. And if your leaders haven't been noticing in the past, they probably need to be prodded a little bit, and that active engagement is going to help you sell your message. So really think about what the outcome is going to look like for you, what you want to achieve, and present some ideas to the leadership team about why it will be important to you and your team. But yeah, look, well done. That's a great first step, but bring it up. I hope you've got leaders who listen and that you can feel comfortable in actually bringing this up because it's a key topic. And as a leader myself, I get the best information from my people. I can Google, I can research, I can ask other companies, but I prefer to ask my people. I prefer to say, what do you actually need? What do you want? That's the best that I can hear and then develop something that works.
Definitely. Thanks.
Hey, Sabrina, I'd like to add in on this part with what Lisa shared. I'd like to remind Caleb that we are all leaders in our own rights. You don't have to be the leader of a firm. You don't have to be the leader of a MNC. Just taking charge of yourself, your own actions, whether you have a small team or you could be a junior executive just by yourself reporting to a boss. Mindfulness starts within yourself. Small steps. If you don't send email to others after office hour, if you need to structure a meeting and you make sure that you arrange that meeting with agendas, you don't call your bosses, you don't call your vendors on weekends unless it's an emergency. All these will relate to other people within your firm. And you don't have to be a leader to make all this work.
Moses.
The only thing I'll add, because I think it's already been said, is give it a shot. And if you find that you're in an environment that doesn't serve you, you deserve better. You deserve to be fulfilled and be well at work. So of course, do what you can, as Lisa has spoken to, and Larson as well. But at some point, if the culture isn't suitable for you, don't be afraid to say that this isn't for me for various reasons. So you have choice as well. I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of us, when we take a step back, we realize that there are more choices that we have than we think when we're in that, in that current moment when things are difficult, right? So actually another question that came up was kind of built upon this one, right? So someone was asking, what are some examples of psychological safety or non-safety that you've observed? Can we share more about that? Moses, would you like to share?
Yeah, well, early in my career, in a particularly alpha, high stress environment, once I had a conversation with my manager then, and glass windows, back in the day where we were still all in the office, and he yelled at me very loudly with glass windows, and nobody in the team felt safe for a very, very long time. And I found out later that I wasn't the only one who had experienced this as well. So that's a bit extreme, but that's a clear example of a lack of safety. But there are also what I would call microaggressions in the workplace, where, for example, let's say you're sick, and then let's say your boss says again, you're sick again. It's not meant as, then of course he says, yes, please take your leave, etc., etc. But I think leaders have to be very mindful about, firstly, just listening when someone is sharing something with you. Listen just to listen not to fix or to solve. Without getting into the details here, but we need both empathy and compassion. So empathy to connect with whatever your employee is saying in front of you, your teammate. But if you stay there, you might get what we call empathetic hijack, where you start to feel heavy and you maybe even take on the stress of the other person. So a bit of empathy, connecting. Then compassion is when you take a step back and you ask the question, how can I be of service? So just practically, I think I just wanted to mention that. And I think safety is when people feel seen, safe, they feel connected, and they have the courage to speak up.
Thanks, Moses. Okay, we'll take one more question before we close out for today. Okay, so this would be for Larson or Lisa, or both. So the question we've got here is, what symptoms or conditions have been on the uptick in your companies? And what have you done to address these? So maybe this is pretty specific. Lisa, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I guess it's a little bit split for us because we've got different areas of the business. But I think probably the most obvious one in terms of that wellness piece is just people feeling like they have been stretched. We've gone through, obviously we have several retail stores, and that's always a busy time. So we've just gone through, Christmas and Chinese New Year, and all the different issues with COVID changing different regulations and how people, can behave in the workplace. So it's that feeling of I'm just too stretched. So, looking at how we can address that, how we can reach out. And just recently we've sent out a whole heap of new surveys. We're starting to put together some information to support people. And we're looking at different ways to get to the real root cause of this, because what does that really look like? We're hearing something's not right, but without getting to the ground and asking the questions, which is our next step, which is putting together that retail group so we can talk to them and say, okay, tell us, no holds barred. What isn't right? What does it look like for you? Because we can make assumptions, but our assumptions could be totally incorrect. So it's really, I think it's really important in these situations when you're trying to dig down and you are seeing an uptick, whether it be an uptick in attrition or an uptick in people complaining, have the on the ground conversations, open up that space so they feel safe to have them. And if you're in a workplace where they don't feel safe, start with the other channels, you know, whether it's suggestion boxes, you know, anonymous email system. And quite often people, if it's a really bad workplace, they're still scared of the email because they think it's going to secretly be tracked and you're going to be pinpointed and you're going to know who said what. So quite often going old fashioned here with the old suggestion box actually helps because people will write something or type it and just stick it in there when no one's looking. And sometimes that's the information you need to identify what the issue is. But be open-minded, you know, have open forums. I've done open forums in businesses before where there's been problems. And, you know, you might be sitting there for the first half hour pretty much just talking to yourself because no one's game enough to say anything. But it just takes that one person to raise the issue and then you find it cascades. And that can be confronting for some leaders because it can be pretty negative. But remember, we're there to listen. We're there to take notes and understand. We're not there to solve the problem straight away. We're there to guarantee them we're going to do something to help, but we need to collate it all to understand what that's going to look like for them. So it's those types of things I think we need to dig down into when we see these issues.
Sure. Lawson, anything else to add to that?
I totally agree with what Lisa just shared. You know, getting to the root cause. Don't take things on the surface. You know, I like to share one incident very quickly. It happened last year. One of my senior staff, his performance just dived over a period of like 1-2 weeks. He stopped responding to emails. He delayed in reply to messages and all that. And as we dig a little bit deeper, we realized that he lost his grandmother, his mother, and his auntie, all to COVID-19 within 2 weeks.
Oh.
A few other members were infected, but he lost 3 of his loved ones all within 2 weeks. At the same time, he's still coming back to work. He's still struggling with all his deadlines. And on the same day, I know about this, you know, where he lost his loved ones. On the other side, I've got a client who's chasing me for his revisions on a 30-page pitch. How does that even balance out? You know, on the surface, you're seeing this employee who is not responding, who is perhaps a little bit skiving on the side. The truth is, he's trying to juggle his losing his loved ones and trying to still do his work on the other side. How do you manage that? So at the end, I told my partners and the team, I said, hey guys, let's run the risk of missing the pitch. We blocked emails from our customers to the staff. We diverted the project to another office. Yes, we wasted a couple of days, but I think in my opinion, that was the right thing to do. So never take things on the surface, go deeper.
Definitely, Lawson. I think it's so important for us to not make any assumptions, right? And everyone, I believe, is really just doing their best and no one wants to do a bad job, right? So I think what I'm taking away from our chat today is for all of us to be a little bit more human and to recognize that the people that we manage, the people that we work with, even our bosses, if we have one, they're human too, right? So I think, Moses, you've brought up the idea of empathy and compassion here. And I think the takeaway for today is that we just need to be a bit more compassionate towards each other. And that includes ourselves. So thank you very much, everyone. We've come to the end of our chat today. And before we go, I just wanted to invite Lisa, Lawson, Moses, if you have any final one-line takeaway for our audience to share today. Moses? If that's one thing that we need to think about or remember, what would that be?
Yeah, I guess it's what I said earlier, but I think whether you're a leader, and as Larson said, everyone has influence, but for me, it's all about doing hard things in a human way, being human and also doing a good job. And I think if we can do that for ourselves and for our teams, I think hopefully the world will be a much better place at large.
Thank you. Lawson? Oh, Lisa, you go first.
So probably just as we speak about this, because I mentioned stigma earlier, I think a great reminder is, you know, before we judge someone, first ask, seek to understand. Because I think we can all get guilty of this when we're busy and we're in the workplace, and whether it's judging ourselves, we might be assuming we're not doing the right thing, or whether it's judging someone else. So first seek to understand.
Thank you. And Larson.
Well, Moses and Lisa has covered almost everything. Like just to share that, you know, it's difficult to change the world, not to mention just within our firm. But let's start with ourselves. I like to think of this as the oxygen mask theory. Take care of yourself, and then you can take care of others. No matter how busy you are, we can always get a second career, but we may only have one chance with our own mental health. So take care of yourself.
Thank you, Larson. And we only have one life too, so let's take care of ourselves.